I came home 2 hours earlier than I was supposed to, and the first thing I heard was my mother telling my wife that she was lucky I had married her. I stopped in the hallway. The front door was still behind me, my keys cold in my hand. Mom didn't know I was home. Neither did my wife, Claire. I don't understand why you keep acting like this is your house, Mom said from the kitchen. You married my son. You didn't inherit this family. Claire didn't answer. That silence bothered me more than the words. My mother continued. You should be grateful I let you stay here when you had nowhere else to go. I felt my jaw tighten. That wasn't true. Claire had never needed my mother's house. We owned our own place across town. She had only been staying there temporarily because she was helping Mom recover from knee surgery. I had been working late for 3 weeks because my company was closing a major deal. I thought my mother was grateful. Apparently, I was wrong. I stepped closer to the kitchen doorway, but then I heard Claire quietly say, I'm not trying to take anything from you. Mom laughed. That's exactly what women like you always say. I froze. Claire finally spoke again. I've never asked for your money. No, Mom replied. You just took my son away from me. There was something in Claire's voice when she answered that I had never heard before. I didn't take him away. Mom lowered her voice. You know what your problem is? You think he loves you enough to believe everything you say. My hand tightened around my keys. I wanted to walk in. I wanted to defend my wife. But then Mom said something that stopped me completely. You still haven't told him, have you? Silence. Claire whispered, please don't. My heart dropped. Told me what? Mom sighed. You have until Friday. After that, I'm telling him myself. I stepped back before either of them could see me. For the first time since I married Claire, I wondered whether there was something about my family that she had been desperately trying to protect me from. And suddenly, my mother's cruelty didn't sound like the beginning of a fight. It sounded like the middle of a secret. I didn't sleep much that night. Claire came home around 11, and I pretended I was already asleep. She stood in the bedroom doorway for a few seconds. Then she whispered, I'm sorry. I kept my eyes closed. My mother had said Claire had something to tell me. Claire had begged her not to say it. The next morning, I left for work without mentioning what I had heard. Claire looked exhausted. You okay? I asked. She forced a smile. Just tired. I almost told her everything. Instead, I kissed her forehead and left. At work, I couldn't concentrate. Then my phone buzzed. It was my mother. Can you come over tonight? We need to talk. About what? I typed. She replied immediately. About Claire. I called her. She didn't answer. When I called again, she rejected the call. That was when I knew this wasn't ordinary family drama. After work, I drove past Mom's house and parked across the street. I watched through the windshield as Claire walked out carrying 2 grocery bags. Mom followed her to the porch. They spoke quietly. Then Mom reached for one of the bags. Claire pulled it away. Mom said something that made Claire's face go pale. Claire looked around, then drove away. I waited 10 minutes before going inside. Mom was sitting at the kitchen table. You heard us yesterday, she said. I stopped. Yes. She nodded. Then you already know Claire has been hiding something from you. I pulled out a chair. What is it? My mother looked directly at me. She has been paying my mortgage. I frowned. That's impossible. Mom shook her head. What's impossible is that you still think your wife is the person you need to protect yourself from. I felt the room change. Why would she do that? Mom looked away. That's the part you need to ask her. I stood up. Before I could leave, Mom said, if you learn where that money came from, you may hate me. I turned around. What does that mean? She said nothing. I walked back to my car with one thought pounding through my head. Claire had been secretly paying my mother's mortgage. And suddenly, I remembered something I had ignored for months. Every time I asked Claire why she was working late, she gave me the same answer. I'm trying to fix something. I had assumed she meant her job. Now I wasn't so sure. Because if Claire had been sacrificing money to protect my mother, there was only one reason she would hide it from me. She knew I would never forgive myself for letting her do it alone. And I was beginning to suspect my mother knew exactly why. I drove home instead of going back to the office. Claire was sitting at the dining table when I walked in, staring at her phone. She looked up. You're home early. I know. Something in my voice made her put the phone down. I sat across from her. Claire, How long have you been paying my mother's mortgage? Her face changed instantly. Not surprise. Fear. Who told you? My mother. Claire closed her eyes. I waited. Finally, she said, how much did she tell you? That you've been paying it. Claire looked toward the window. Then she whispered, almost 2 years. I stared at her. 2 years. She nodded. Why? She didn't answer. I leaned forward. Claire, please. She rubbed her hands together. Your mother was going to lose the house. That still doesn't explain why you hid it from me. Because you would have paid it. Yes. And she would have let you. I frowned. What does that mean? Claire looked directly at me. She didn't want your money. She wanted control. The words landed harder than I expected. Claire continued. After we got married, your mother started calling me whenever she needed something. At first it was little things. Groceries. Utilities. Repairs. I knew about some of that. You knew what she wanted you to know. I felt my stomach tighten. Claire reached for her phone. She had debt. Credit cards. A second mortgage. Medical bills. I found out because the bank sent a notice to the house. Why didn't she tell me? Because she knew you would sell your investments to save her. I stared at Claire. She opened an email and turned the phone toward me. It was a payment confirmation. Hundreds of dollars. Then another. Then another. There were dozens. My wife had been quietly covering my mother's debts while I thought Mom was simply struggling with a few bills. Why would you let this happen? Claire's eyes filled with tears. Because she threatened you. I went completely still. What did she threaten? Claire hesitated. Then she said, she told me that if I ever told you about the debt, she would make sure you believed I was stealing from you. I stood up. My chair scraped against the floor. That's insane. I know. No. Claire. What else? She looked at me for several seconds. Then she opened another folder on her phone. Inside was a photograph of a document. My name was on it. So was my mother's. And at the bottom was a signature that looked exactly like mine. I had never seen that document before. Claire whispered, your mother didn't just want me to pay her debts. She wanted me to sign something. I looked at the signature again. Then I realized why Claire had been so afraid. I took a picture of the document with my phone. Then I looked at Claire. Where did you get this? She swallowed. Your mother left it on the kitchen counter 3 months ago. What is it? A loan agreement. I looked closer. The document claimed that I had borrowed $85,000 from my mother. According to the agreement, I had promised to repay her within 5 years. My signature was at the bottom. But I had never borrowed $85,000 from anyone. This is forged. Claire nodded. I know. How? Because I checked. She opened another file. It contained bank statements. There were no deposits showing my mother had ever given me that money. Instead, there were payments going in the opposite direction. From Claire. To my mother. Over and over again. I felt something inside me harden. Why would she need a fake loan agreement? Claire looked at me. Because she was planning to use it against you. How? She told me she wanted you to refinance the house. My mother's house. I suddenly understood why Mom had been so interested in my finances during the past year. She had asked about my investments. My retirement account. My savings. Even the life insurance policy I had through work. At the time, I thought she was just being nosy. Now every question felt different. Claire continued. She wanted you to sign over part of your investment account as collateral. For a debt that didn't exist. Yes. I stood and walked toward the window. Outside, a delivery truck stopped across the street. For a few seconds, I watched the driver carry boxes toward a neighbor's porch. Then I remembered something. 6 months earlier, Mom had asked me to sign some insurance paperwork. I had refused because I was late for work. She had looked disappointed. I had completely forgotten about it. Claire saw my expression. You remembered something. Maybe. I told her. Her face went pale. That may be the document she was talking about. I turned around. Claire, why didn't you go to the police? She looked down. Because I was afraid. Of my mother? Not exactly. She reached into a drawer and pulled out a small envelope. There's someone else involved. My chest tightened. Who? Claire placed the envelope on the table. I don't know his full name. Your mother called him Mark. Inside was a photograph. A man stood beside my mother outside a bank. On the back, Claire had written one sentence. He was there the day your mother opened an account using your name. I stared at the photograph. Then my phone rang. It was my mother. I answered. Her first words were calm. Son, we need to talk before Claire tells you any more lies. That was when I knew. She wasn't afraid I had discovered the truth. She was afraid Claire had proof. I didn't tell my mother what I knew. Instead, I said, what lies? There was a pause. Then she laughed softly. Claire has always been good at making herself look innocent. I looked at my wife. She was standing across the room, completely silent. What exactly are you accusing her of? Taking money from you. My eyes moved to Claire. She shook her head. Mom continued before I could respond. I found bank records. She's been moving money around without telling you. That was the first moment I realized how carefully my mother had prepared this story. She wasn't defending herself. She was trying to get ahead of the evidence. Send me the records, I said. I will. The call ended. Claire looked at me. You don't believe her? No. She exhaled. Good. I picked up the envelope again. Tell me about Mark. Claire sat down. He came to your mother's house about 8 months ago. She introduced him as someone who helped with financial paperwork. Did you speak to him? Once. What did he say? That he was helping your mother reorganize her debts. I studied the photograph. Something bothered me. The bank behind them looked familiar. I turned the picture over. Which bank? Claire shook her head. I don't know. I zoomed in on the photograph. The sign above the entrance was partially visible. I recognized the logo. It was the same bank where my company deposited my salary. I called a friend who worked in the bank's fraud department. I didn't tell him the whole story. I simply asked whether a person could open an account using someone else's identity without that person knowing. He became serious immediately. It happens, he said. But if you suspect it, don't confront whoever did it. Preserve everything first. I thanked him and hung up. Claire looked worried. What did he say? That I need evidence. She nodded. I already have some. She pulled out her laptop. There were emails. Dozens of them. Most were between my mother and Mark. At first they looked harmless. Debt arrangements. Payment schedules. Bank appointments. Then I found one dated 11 months earlier. My mother had written. Once he signs, the house will be protected. Claire won't be able to interfere anymore. My stomach turned. There was a reply from Mark. And if he refuses? My mother's response was only 6 words. Then we make Claire look guilty. I stared at the screen. Claire covered her mouth. I scrolled further. The final email was from 3 weeks ago. Mark had written. The forged signature is ready. We just need him to sign the refinance papers. I looked at Claire. Neither of us spoke. Then another notification appeared. A new email had arrived. It was from my mother. The subject line contained only 4 words. Your wife betrayed you. I opened it. And what I read made me realize the plan had already moved to its final stage. The email from my mother contained 3 attachments. The first was a bank statement. The second was a photograph of Claire holding an envelope outside a branch. The third was a letter accusing my wife of financial fraud. Mom had written only one sentence above them. I tried to protect you. Now you need to protect yourself. For a moment, I almost laughed. Not because anything was funny. Because the timing was too perfect. She knew I had found something. She was trying to make me doubt Claire before I could understand what I had discovered. I opened the bank statement. The account was under my name. But the address was my mother's house. There were deposits and withdrawals I didn't recognize. Claire leaned over my shoulder. That account wasn't there last week. What? I checked the documents from the bank. That account number was never mentioned. I stared at the transactions. Then I noticed something. Every withdrawal happened on a day when I had been working late. Every deposit came from an account belonging to my mother. My first reaction was anger. My second was clarity. Someone wanted these transactions to look like I had been moving money through my mother's account. I called the fraud department again. This time, I told them everything. The employee asked me to come in with identification. Before leaving, I opened the photograph Mom had sent. Claire was standing outside the bank with the envelope. But Claire hadn't been alone. A reflection in the glass showed Mark standing several feet behind her. I zoomed in. He wasn't watching Claire. He was watching the security camera above the entrance. That detail changed everything. "Claire," I said quietly. She looked at me. "I think your mother-in-law's plan isn't just about money." She nodded slowly. "I've been trying to tell you." "No. I mean something worse." I pointed at the photograph. "They're creating a record that makes it look like you're part of this." Claire's face went pale. Then she whispered, "So when the forged loan appears, they'll say you helped me hide the money. And if the bank investigates, they'll find transactions designed to look like fraud." Claire sat down. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then I made a decision. I wasn't going to confront my mother. Not yet. I called my friend at the bank and asked one question. "Can you tell me when that account was opened?" He checked. Then his voice changed. "It was opened 11 months ago." "By whom?" There was another pause. "Your mother." I closed my eyes. That confirmed one thing. But then he added something that made my blood run cold. "The application contains your driver's license number." I looked at Claire. My mother hadn't just forged my signature. She had access to my identity. And I suddenly understood why she had spent the last year asking me for documents. I went to the bank the next morning with Claire. My friend met us in a private office and closed the door. He placed a folder on the table. "I pulled everything I legally could," he said. Inside were copies of the account application, identification records, transaction history, and security logs. I read the first page. My driver's license number. My social security number. My old address. Everything was correct. Except one thing. The signature. It wasn't mine. I looked at Claire. She whispered, "Can they prove who opened it?" My friend nodded. "The application was submitted electronically, but the security footage from the branch is still available." He turned his laptop toward us. The video showed my mother walking into the bank with Mark. They sat together. Mark filled out the application. My mother handed him an identification folder. Then she looked directly at the camera. My stomach tightened. She knew. My friend nodded. She also made 3 withdrawals using the same identification information. Where did the money go? He opened another document. Every withdrawal had been transferred to an account belonging to Mark. Claire stared at the screen. So they were moving money through my husband's identity. Exactly. I felt strangely calm. For months, I had wondered why my mother kept humiliating Claire. Now I finally understood. Claire wasn't the problem. She was the obstacle. My mother had been using her cruelty to isolate Claire, making sure that when everything collapsed, I would believe my wife was responsible. Then my phone buzzed. A message from Mom. "Come alone. We need to settle this today." I showed it to Claire. She shook her head. "Don't go." "I have to." "Why?" "Because she thinks I still don't know." I called my attorney instead. 30 minutes later, he had reviewed the documents. His answer was simple. "Don't confront her with everything. Let her talk." So I went to my mother's house. Alone. She was sitting at the kitchen table where I had heard her humiliating Claire days earlier. She smiled when I entered. "I knew you'd come." I sat down. "You were right about one thing." Her smile widened. "Claire has been hiding things from me." Mom leaned forward. "I tried to warn you." I looked at her. "But you made one mistake." Her expression changed. "What mistake?" "You assumed I would never check." The smile disappeared. I placed a single photograph on the table. It showed her and Mark entering the bank. She stared at it. Then I placed another beside it. The security image of Mark filling out the application. Mom didn't speak. I leaned back. "You have 10 seconds to explain why you used my identity." Her face hardened. Then she said something I never expected. "Because I was trying to save this family." I almost believed she meant it. Then she added quietly, "Your father would have done the same." That was when I realized this wasn't just my mother's plan. She had learned it from someone else. I stared at my mother. "Dad." She looked toward the window. "Your father knew about the debt." My father had been dead for 9 years. What does that have to do with this? Mom folded her hands. "Before he died, he borrowed money. A lot of it. He left me with nothing but the house and those debts." I said nothing. She continued. "I panicked. Mark was the only person who offered to help. But he wanted something in return. The house. She nodded. He said if I could make you refinance it, he could move the debt into your name. Once that happened, the house would become collateral. I looked at the forged agreement on the table. And Claire? She found out. My mother's voice became smaller. She confronted me. She said she would tell you everything. So you threatened her. I begged her. You humiliated her. Mom looked down. I thought if I made you angry with her, you'd stop listening to her. I felt something inside me break. Not because my mother had betrayed me. Because she had spent 2 years making my wife carry a burden that should have been mine. Claire had paid thousands of dollars to keep my mother's house from being taken. She had protected me from a debt I didn't even know existed. And my mother had repaid her by making her feel unwelcome in her own family. I stood. You should have told me. I was ashamed. You chose to destroy Claire instead. Mom started crying. For the first time, I didn't move toward her. I called my attorney. The next few weeks were ugly. The bank froze the fraudulent account. The security footage, emails, transaction records, and forged documents were turned over to investigators. Mark was arrested for identity theft and fraud. My mother wasn't spared either. She eventually admitted what she had done. She lost the house. But Claire and I didn't. We never refinanced anything. And I made one decision that mattered more than all the legal consequences. I stopped confusing forgiveness with permission. Months later, Claire and I stood in our kitchen on a Sunday morning. She was making coffee. I walked behind her and wrapped my arms around her. You don't have to protect me from my family anymore, I said. She turned around. I know. I smiled. Outside, the morning was quiet. For months, I had thought the worst thing my mother had done was humiliate my wife. I was wrong. The worst thing was making Claire believe she had to suffer alone to keep me safe. That was the part one could never undo. But I could make sure it never happened again. And when Claire handed me my coffee that morning, I realized something simple. My mother had spent 2 years trying to convince me that my wife was the threat. In the end, Claire was the person who had been protecting me all along.